Hey, Sunday, August 17th, 2025, Lviv, Ukraine. All right, so I'm going to do two videos today. One on this Alaska summit, and then one on the reasons why the population is in steep decline in Europe and most of the Western world. I mean, among European populations in America, birth rates are also low. But let's start with this reaction to the Alaska summit, and how Ukraine is going to survive. What's the way I see it. It's I have to say I'm okay with Trump talking to Putin. I mean, what they were doing before wasn't working, ignoring Putin and keep sending like minimum weapons here that have been stripped down, and then putting limitations on how they can be used. That wasn't working. I mean, the Russians had gained Kherson and Zaporozhye, and they're ahead compared to where they started in 2022, and Ukraine is behind. That's just the facts. I mean, that's not you can go on any news channel and see that. So they have to do something different. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result every time. And I'm just, disappointed in Europe not going all in to defend Ukraine. I mean, this is on Europe's doorstep, and they could just ignore America and come up with some, new weapons that don't need U.S. permission. The Europeans could easily reverse engineer a Patriot missile system or ATACMS rocket, especially the Germans. They invented all this rocket technology back in the day. And I mean, they have the European Space Agency. They have a lot of technology. I mean, Norway has these NASAMS, these surface-to-air missiles. It's like everyone says Patriot's better than NASAMS, but I guess they just do different jobs. They're just meant for different things, maybe. Because and I guess Norway is trying to ramp up production of those things, for the future. And there's artillery shells are being sent over here, but it's all a strategy, I guess, just to give Ukraine barely enough. I mean, the only way now I see this going, because there's never going to be a solid agreement. There's going to be this kind of a quiet ceasefire like what happened in Korea. Things just kind of froze, but how do we get there? How do we just get to something where the Russians just, decide that, they have enough, and, and Ukraine is able to hold the line to, just make them want to, do something else. And then we just have this like Korean-style border. So how do we get to a Korea solution, which is really the best and most realistic solution? So it looks like Europe is going to have to buy the weapons from America and make their own weapons and just send them here into Ukraine. Ukraine is going to have to build up their army. The border that they're defending, or the line, I should say, the line between Russia and Ukraine. It's something like the distance from Florida to Washington D.C. or Florida to New York. It's pretty long. It's like almost the whole U.S. East Coast, basically. It's or half of the U.S. East Coast, we should say, which is a very long border. So Ukraine is going to have to do some massive drafting, and to get some probably 2.5 million men. I mean, I think at least, you think about the cities in America and how many people there are, across the eastern seaboard in the U.S., and how many police and everything it takes just to man one of those cities. And we have a whole border here. I mean, we have a whole battle line that's as long as like the East United States. So yeah, Ukraine's gonna have to get 2.5 million guys, and I mean, I guess they're gonna have to drag them kicking or screaming or something, because the draft is not very popular, and I mean, I've seen these Azov battalion videos and everything, but I think they're only getting like 1,000 people at best, foreign volunteers, because it looks like Europe won't chip in, and that's kind of like one of those red line things for the Russians. They seem to be okay with Ukraine fighting, being supplied by Europe, and their perspective is that's going to drain the European economy, and eventually Europe will, elect all nationalists, and you know they're in this long game, right? They've pivoted their whole $2 trillion economy for this war. So Europe, yeah, Ukraine, 2.5 million men. Europe is going to have to buy HIMARS and ATACMS. U.S. so obviously they'll have to pay America for this. America will ramp up production of these weapon systems. Maybe they can be built in Europe, or Europe can build some equivalent systems. But Ukraine is going to have to fight smarter, because obviously they don't have the numbers. So they're going to have to use these robotic tanks and, you know, with machine guns. But, you know, with 2.5 million men, and they can probably use POWs for this. POWs have nothing else to do. All these captured people, especially the foreign soldiers, they're just going to have to dig a big ass trench. You know, I mean, it's going to be the biggest trench in the world, and it's going to have to be deep, and it's going to have to be wide, and then start putting up a wall. I don't know, it's going to need a lot of concrete, a lot of timber to make it like a trench that doesn't collapse in the rain, you know, and that can at least start getting a Korean wall going. You know, there's like a big DMZ between like Korea, North and South Korea, and this is what I think has to start taking place. Wherever the line is now, they just got to start digging, you know, get people there digging, and in the meantime, you know, use the HIMARS, use the ATACMS to hit all these nodes, you know, whether it's troop clusters. You know, the Russians are now getting ready for another offensive, you know, and so obviously they have to mass the troops somewhere, and then they have to mass the ammunition somewhere, and they have to mass, you know, have command centers, and as long as Ukraine can keep tagging those. But the Russians have changed tactics. I've been watching all this on YouTube. This is nothing, I don't have any privileged information. They're sending patrols of like 4 or 5 guys, because like I said, it's a big front line. That's the word I was looking for, front line. You know, it's a massively long front line, so obviously there's holes in the fence. You know, it's like they're fighting on some village or something, and then you go like 100 kilometers and there's nothing. And the Russians are sending, you know, patrols of 4 or 5 people in there, and, you know, getting deep behind the lines. And then if they find a hole, then they call in some more tanks and trucks and all this, and try to get behind the Ukrainians, right? You know, this flanking movements. So that's why I said they really need to dig a trench and just hold what they got. You know, it's just unrealistic to try to go forward. They got to figure out a holding strategy, and, you know, just get this wall up, like the Berlin Wall, or, you know, the Korean DMZ, and, you know, just keep using ATACMS, using all this drones or whatever to keep hitting the logistics, hitting troop clusters, hitting command centers, you know, going behind, you know, this stuff they're doing behind enemy lines, you know, like using the train full of drones to blow up airplanes, and they're blowing up the refineries. They got to stop taking credit for that. They got to give credit to some people inside Russia, so they can start a civil war in Russia. You know, you know, I don't know, like, you know, when U.S. did special operations, you know, we're just hearing about how they were actually executed. You know, the ones that were done like 20 years ago, we're just now getting some very vague details how they were executed. But like when Ukraine does special operations, it's like they tell everything, like how they did it, and then they can't do it again. You know, it's I mean, it takes like years to build these networks inside the country and everything, and then they just you know, post it on Instagram. You know, it's yeah, we did this, we did that. They ought to just leave it to their imagination. I mean, yes, they probably need some PR to satisfy all the people doing the funding or whatever, but they can just give classified briefings to their, you know, European and American and Canadian or British partners on this, instead of, you know, widespread publishing the details. I mean, yeah, maybe it's cool for recruiting or something, but I think most people know there's got to be more confidentiality and more blame shifting. You know, give you know, they'll get credit, and you know, most of these special operation guys, you know, they're not in it to get the credit. You know, they're, you know, it's usually they give the credit to someone else. You know, that can shift the war a little bit. Like I say, give it to the Chechenians or something. Then Putin will have to send all his, you know, guys down to Chechnya, and he'll be fighting with Kadyrov. You know, then you get them 2 guys fighting with each other. So I mean, yeah. So that's the way I see forward with Ukraine. You know, it's they've got to dig the trench, attack the nodes, make this border airtight, make this front line, airtight, because the Russians have the numbers, right? If they keep doing these like patrols and find these holes and then they infiltrate, and then the Ukrainians have to get pulled off the front line, and then they have to intercept these guys. It's just, oh God, it's just a hot mess. It's not something you want to deal with, so yeah. And I think they can use the POWs for this. It's not inhumane as long as they're getting fed and, getting enough sleep and everything. It's a job, it's just like, prisoners in America make license plates. These guys can dig trenches and stuff. It's a job. Maybe even pay them 25 cents an hour or something, and they, keep it in an account for them if there's ever swap back. Then they can have good things to say when they go home, and maybe spy for Ukraine when they go back. If they're swapped back and forth. But yeah, I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. I mean, like I said, I think Trump is doing the best he can to get this war stopped, and in a realistic way. He hasn't given away Ukraine or said anything about, oh, we're going to give it away and give Putin everything he wants. Obviously, there's going to have to be a compromise. It's life isn't fair. And if they just keep going on the way they're going now, right? I mean, the Russians are just going to grind on for years till they get what they want. And I mean, Europe has not put 2 feet in. America is, just wants to sell the weapons. I mean, these are all the cards on the table, talking about cards. I mean, this is the hand you have to play. You can't play the theoretical hand. You have to play the realistic hand. The hand that you're dealt, not the hand you wish you were dealt. And they've got to, like I said, I was okay with, like, if they have to give up a little bit of territory, and then they get a durable piece like this wall, this DMZ on the front line, like in Korea, and they get, allowed to put foreign soldiers there, like Germans and Polish and, 500,000 foreign soldiers, 2 million Ukrainians, and they get the air cover to go with it. I mean, that's a huge thing about the NATO, right, that Ukraine doesn't have. The NATO is like 10 NATO soldiers become as effective as 150 Russian soldiers with the airplanes overhead, with the ability to call in JDAMs, and precision strikes, and all the intel, all the ability to, catch everything. They it's a huge, so I don't know, so if they can get this, and then yeah, Ukraine needs to have this air power. So if they can get, if it's all has to be all Ukrainian, then Ukraine has to be able to get all the weapons. So they get more F-16s, but with the proper equipment, Ukrainian markings on the F-16s, they can always hire contractors to fly them. But I mean, and I mean, as long as they're, they can at least deliver, ordnance from the air. And that would, make those 5 Ukrainian guys on patrol worth like, 50 Russians, suddenly, or 100 even 300 or 400 if you can call in precision strikes. It becomes like this huge multiplier. This was like how U.S. Special Forces and everything, like Navy SEALs and Special Forces. I mean, yeah, they're tough guys and everything, but really what makes them stand apart is the air cover. That's what gives them this ability to do like superhuman things in the battlefield. Otherwise, they're weighed down just like everyone else. They're carrying an 80-pound pack, and the ammo runs out, the food runs out. They're good for about, and then, they just get overwhelmed, or, just like in this lone survivor situation where they couldn't get the airplanes in there because of the weather. So, that's what people have to understand. So Ukraine really needs this air cover. They need to be able to call in precision strikes, like on demand, having planes loitering up above, and that would start holding the line. So if they were able to, like I say, get this line manned, get that trench built and hold the line, then the Russians will just be, it becomes much, much harder for them. And then they start thinking, okay, this is where we quit, this is where we stop, things pause. And then it becomes like an economic war. How do we bankrupt the new Soviet Union? How do we isolate them? Break this linkage between them and the Chinese and them and the Indians, and get them to collapse, You know, and how do we, I guess the people don't want to stoke a civil war in Russia because of the nuclear weapons that, you know, some really crazy people, not just your usual crazy, but super crazy people get a hold of nukes, and then it all just, you know, then they sell it to like Al Qaeda or something, and then we have another mess. But I think they got a pretty good handle on that. I don't know. But I think this is the way it's going to go. That's just my prediction, that nothing materially changed in Alaska, and I think Europe has to get behind this kind of strategy to give Ukraine force multipliers, to give Ukraine more ability to hold this line, and I think they have to do this massive infrastructure project. I mean, it would have to be a really deep and wide trench with a big wall on it and big minefields, and yeah, it would suck. It's a big project. It would probably just take like 1 million guys just doing that. I don't know if they have enough prisoners to do that, you know, but you'd have to use a combination of prisoners and, you know, probably some older people who just, you know, still have a good back, you know, or can run a backhoe or run all this machinery. And then, I mean, that becomes, those Caterpillar machines become as valuable as tanks. And then, you know, keep hitting the nodes, you know, keep breaking up the formations and keep them off balance so that you can slow down their advance. And then eventually, like I said, eventually we plug the leaks and everything stops up, and then hopefully, you know, we get some unsteady peace. Like, and the Koreans have boomed off of this. You know, the Korea has really, you know, become an economic power. I mean, even though it's just like this big elephant in the room next door to them, you know, it's just, yeah. So I think that's where it's going. Anyway, on to the next video.